Sophia Matthews, a seasoned nurse with decades of experience, rushed into the delivery room. The face of a young girl, barely 14 years old, that immediately caught her attention. Selina. The girl's eyes were wide with terror, her small body trembling from the pain of labor. It wasn't just the typical fear of childbirth. This was something deeper, something raw and overwhelming. Sophia had seen countless young mothers in her years, but something about Selina struck her. Maybe it was how small and fragile she looked in that hospital bed, or the fact that she was all alone with no comforting hand to hold. Selina's face contorted in agony as she gripped the bed sheets, her breaths coming in quick, shallow bursts. I can't do this," Selina whimpered, her voice barely a whisper. Tears streamed down her face as her body shuddered with contractions. "You're doing great, sweetheart," Sophia said softly, stepping closer to the girl's bedside. She placed a comforting hand on Selina's shoulder, her voice calm and steady. "Just breathe. You're strong, Selina. I'm right here." But Selina didn't seem to hear her. The room was a flurry of activity as doctors and nurses prepared for what was shaping up to be a complicated birth. It wasn't just one baby, there were 3. Triplets. Selina was in no condition to comprehend the magnitude of it all, and Sophia could see that the reality of her situation was beginning to crash down on her like a tidal wave. As the minutes dragged on, Sophia stayed by Selina's side, trying to soothe the frightened girl with soft reassurances. But it wasn't enough. The labor was too intense, and soon the decision was made to perform a C-section. Sophia watched as the medical team moved swiftly into action, their hands expertly preparing for the procedure. Selina's face was pale, her breaths shallow, her fingers trembling as she gripped the bed rails. Sophia leaned in close, her voice barely a murmur. "It's going to be okay, Selina. I know you're scared, but you're not alone. I'm here." The surgery felt like an eternity, but finally, after what seemed like hours, the first cry pierced the air. A baby girl, tiny and fragile, was lifted into the world, followed closely by her siblings, another girl and a boy. The sight of them, so small and vulnerable, should have brought joy, but instead, Selina's face remained blank. Sophia's heart sank as she saw the young mother's vacant expression. There was no smile, no relief, only a hollow emptiness in her eyes. Sophia knew that look all too well. The next few days were no easier. Every time Sophia entered the maternity ward, she found Selina in the same state, distant, disconnected. The young girl sat in her hospital bed, the babies beside her, but she hardly touched them. She didn't cradle them, didn't smile when they cooed or cried. There was a heaviness in the room, a dark cloud that hung over Selina like a shroud. "Have you thought about names for the babies?" Sophia asked gently one afternoon, hoping to spark some light in the girl. Selina didn't even look up. She just stared blankly at the wall, her fingers absent-mindedly twisting the edge of her blanket. Sophia frowned, a knot tightening in her chest. She had seen this before postpartum depression. It wasn't uncommon, especially in young mothers, but that didn't make it any less heartbreaking. Sophia's worry deepened with each passing day. Selina had no visitors. No one had come to see her or the babies. Not a single family member, not a friend, no sign of the baby's father. It was as if the young girl had been abandoned in this moment of overwhelming need, left to navigate the storm of motherhood all by herself. Late one evening, as the ward grew quiet, Sophia found herself standing outside Selina's room, peering in through the small window in the door. Selina was awake, her eyes red from crying, but her gaze remained fixed on the ceiling. Sophia's heart ached for her. She knew that kind of isolation, that unbearable weight of feeling like the world had turned its back on you. Sophia stepped into the room, her steps slow and soft. "Selina?" she called quietly, pulling a chair up to the side of the bed. "Can we talk?" Selina turned her head slightly, her eyes dull and tired. "What's there to talk about?" she muttered, her voice flat, lifeless. Sophia's hand hovered for a moment before she placed it gently on Selina's arm. "I know it feels impossible right now, but you're not alone in this. We'll get through it. Together." But as the silence stretched between them, Sophia couldn't help but wonder how much longer could Selina carry this weight before she broke. Sophia stood at the doorway of Selina's hospital room, her hand resting lightly on the frame as she watched the young girl lie motionless on the bed. Selina's pale face was turned toward the window, where the evening light crept through the blinds, casting soft shadows across the sterile room. It had been days since Selina had spoken more than a few words. Sophia knew the weight of what had happened, the shock of giving birth to 3 tiny, helpless babies at just 14, and it weighed heavily on her too. But what weighed more was the silence, the impenetrable wall that Selina had built around herself since the moment she arrived. Sophia had seen this before. She had watched young mothers sink into this kind of quiet despair, their faces blank, their eyes hollow. But something about Selina was different, more distant, as if the silence wasn't just sadness, it was hiding something deeper, something Sophia needed to understand if she was going to help. Slowly she stepped into the room, her shoes making a soft clicking sound against the tile floor. "Hey, Selina," she said gently, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't want to startle her. "How are you feeling today? Mind if I sit down for a minute?" Selina didn't move. Her eyes remained fixed on the narrow sliver of sky outside the window, her arms curled protectively around herself. It was as if the world beyond the hospital walls was the only thing she cared to look at, the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. Sophia sighed softly and took a seat in the chair beside Selina's bed, her eyes scanning the room, looking for something, anything, that might break through this wall of silence. "I was thinking maybe tomorrow we could—" "I don't want to talk." Selina's voice was cold, sharp like a razor blade, cutting Sophia off mid-sentence. Sophia blinked, momentarily thrown off by the bitterness in her tone. She had expected resistance, but not this. "That's okay," Sophia replied, softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "You don't have to talk. But if you ever do, I'm here." Silence. Again. For hours, it seemed like every attempt to reach her was met with the same cold distance. Selina lay there, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. And when she wasn't staring, she was crying quietly, so softly that Sophia almost didn't hear it at first. But the glistening tears trailing down her cheeks told the whole story. This wasn't just a young girl overwhelmed by motherhood. There was something else eating away at her, and Sophia knew it. Every night was the same. Selina would lie there almost catatonic, her expression void of emotion. And Sophia would sit nearby, hoping for just one word, one clue as to what was going on inside that fragile mind. But it never came. Not at first, anyway. After days of this painful routine, Sophia began to wonder if Selina was hiding more than just sadness. There was a coldness in her silence, a darkness in her eyes that didn't match the typical fear or depression she had seen in other young mothers. It was as if she was protecting something, something that couldn't be spoken aloud. Late one night, after her shift had ended, Sophia found herself unable to leave the hospital. Instead of going home, she wandered the empty halls, her mind consumed with thoughts of Selina. What was she hiding? Was it fear, shame, or something darker? Sophia knew she couldn't push too hard, but the more time she spent around Selina, the more she felt that something terrible was being left unsaid. She decided to be patient. It was all she could do. And then, one afternoon, it happened. Selina turned her head, ever so slightly, and gave Sophia a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was barely there, just a faint curl at the corner of her lips, but it was something, a crack in the wall. Sophia's heart skipped a beat, hope blooming where there had only been frustration. "Hey," Sophia said softly, trying not to sound too eager. "That's a nice smile." Selina didn't respond, but the fact that she had smiled at all was a breakthrough in Sophia's eyes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. After all the coldness, the tears and the unspoken fears, maybe, just maybe, Selina was ready to open up. But Sophia knew better than to rush. Sophia sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes scanning Selina's pale face. The young girl had been through so much, and yet every time Sophia tried to get close, it was like hitting a wall. Selina sat motionless, her eyes cast downward, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. She had barely said a word since her babies were born, and Sophia could feel the weight of unspoken pain hanging in the air between them. "Selina, you can talk to me. You know that, right?" Sophia's voice was soft, but firm, trying to break through the invisible barrier that Selina had built around herself. But the girl just sat there, her lips pressed tightly together, refusing to meet Sophia's gaze. The room was quiet. The only sound was the gentle beeping of the hospital machines and the soft cooing of the babies sleeping nearby. For a moment, Sophia thought she saw a flicker of something in Selina's eyes, maybe fear, maybe guilt, but it was gone before she could really place it. "Sweetheart, you're not alone in this," Sophia said again, her voice almost pleading now. "Whatever it is, whatever you're feeling, I'm here." But still, Selina said nothing, her tears the only response. Sophia sighed, knowing that no matter how much she wanted to help, Selina had to be the one to open up. She could only wait. Later that night, Sophia decided to take a quick break, stepping outside the ward to clear her mind. The hospital halls were dimly lit, eerily quiet as the night shift settled in. She rubbed her temples, trying to shake off the sense of unease that had been lingering ever since Selina came under her care. Something wasn't right. She could feel it in her gut. As she walked back towards Selina's room, something caught her eye. A shadowy figure stood at the end of the hall, right outside Selina's door. A young man, she thinks so, dressed in a dark hoodie, their face hidden in the shadows. He stood perfectly still, staring into the room through the small glass window on the door. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. "Hey!" she called out, her voice echoing down the empty corridor. The figure didn't move at first, just kept staring into the room. Sophia felt a surge of protectiveness rise inside her. Who was this person? Why were they watching Selina? "Who are you?" Sophia demanded, walking briskly toward the stranger, but before she could get too close, the figure turned and bolted down the hall. Sophia's instincts kicked in, and without thinking, she chased after them. Her footsteps pounded against the floor as she raced down the long, empty corridor, the figure always just a few steps ahead. She could see the outline of the hoodie bouncing with each stride, but the person was fast, too fast. By the time Sophia reached the exit door at the end of the hall, the stranger had disappeared into the night. Breathing heavily, Sophia stood by the door, her eyes scanning the dark parking lot outside. Whoever it was, they were gone now, but the uneasy feeling in her chest remained. Something was definitely wrong. When Sophia returned to Selina's room, she found the girl lying in bed, her back turned to the door. The babies were still peacefully sleeping in their bassinets. Selina hadn't moved, but Sophia noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way she clutched the blanket tightly in her fists. "Selina, I need to talk to you," Sophia said, trying to keep her voice calm even though her mind was racing. "There was someone outside your room just now. Do you know who it was?" Selina's body tensed even more, but she didn't turn around. For a moment, Sophia thought she wouldn't answer at all. Then, barely above a whisper, Selina said, "Yes, I know him." Sophia frowned, stepping closer to the bed. Who was it? Why was he here? Selina was silent again, her breathing shallow. The room felt colder, as if the air itself had thickened with tension. Sophia's skin prickled with a sense of impending danger. "Selina, you need to tell me what's going on," Sophia insisted, her voice firmer now. "I can't help you if you don't talk to me." Finally, Selina rolled over to face her, her eyes red from crying. But instead of answering, she just shook her head. "Please, Sophia," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Just don't ask." Sophia's heart clenched at the fear in the girl's voice. Whatever this was, whoever that man was, it was clear that Selina was terrified. But why? What was she hiding? The feeling of unease only grew stronger as Sophia stared down at Selina. She couldn't shake the sense that something very wrong was happening. She was going to protect Selina and the babies, no matter what. But first, she had to find out the truth, and she knew Selina wasn't going to give it up easily. The silence between them hung heavy, unspoken words and hidden fears swirling in the air. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of the machines and the occasional rustling of sheets as Selina shifted uncomfortably in her bed. Her eyes, dark and heavy with sleepless nights, stared out the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass. She was trying to distract herself from the overwhelming thoughts that seemed to drown her at every moment. But deep down, she knew she couldn't avoid them forever. Selina had been holding everything inside for too long. The weight of her past, the pain of abandonment, and the fear of the future, everything was suffocating her. Sophia, the kind-hearted nurse who had been with her since the birth of her twins, stood quietly by the door, observing her. She could sense the turmoil brewing inside Selina, the way she kept her emotions locked up tight, afraid to let anyone in. Sophia knew that feeling all too well. She had seen it in many young mothers over the years, but there was something about Selina that pulled at her heart. Maybe it was the way Selina tried to put on a brave face, or the quiet strength she showed despite everything. Or maybe it was because Sophia saw a bit of herself in the young girl. Sophia gently cleared her throat, breaking the silence, and moved closer to Selina's bedside. "You know, sometimes it helps to talk about it," Sophia said softly, her voice calm and soothing. Selina turned her head slowly, her tired eyes meeting Sophia's. For a moment she said nothing, her lips pressed together as if she was fighting to keep the words from spilling out. But something about Sophia's presence made Selina feel safe, like maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry the weight all by herself anymore. After a long pause, Selina finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "They left me," she said, her words filled with years of pent-up hurt. "My parents left when I was a little girl. They said I ruined their life, everything. So, they left." Just like that. Sophia's heart ached as she listened, but she didn't interrupt. She knew how hard it was to open up, how much courage it took to speak those words aloud. Selina continued, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and sadness. "I thought maybe they'd looked for me, you know? Maybe they'd realized that I needed them, but they never did. They just left me all alone to figure it out on my own." Tears welled up in Selina's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, as if ashamed of her vulnerability. Sophia reached out, placing a comforting hand on Selina's arm. "I'm so sorry, Selina," Sophia whispered. I know how hard that must have been. But you're not alone anymore, okay? I'm here for you. Selina looked up at her, surprised by the warmth in her voice. For so long she had felt abandoned, unwanted. But here was Sophia, a stranger who seemed to care more than her own parents ever did. Slowly, Selina began to trust Sophia, opening up little by little, as if testing the waters. Sophia, sensing that Selina needed to know she wasn't the only one who had gone through something like this, decided to share her own story. You know, when I was younger, I found myself in a similar situation, Sophia began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I got pregnant when I was just a little older than you. The father left, and I had no one to turn to. I thought my life was over. Selina listened intently, her eyes widening in surprise. She hadn't expected Sophia to understand, but here she was, telling her a story that mirrored her own in so many ways. But I got through it, Sophia continued. It wasn't easy, but I found help in places I never expected. And I made it. You will too. For the first time in weeks, a small glimmer of hope flickered in Selina's heart. Maybe she could survive this. Maybe she didn't have to face it all on her own. We're going to make a plan, Sophia said with quiet determination, taking a seat beside Selina. We'll figure out what's next for you and the babies, step by step, and I promise you won't have to do it alone. In the days that followed, Sophia rallied support for Selina. She reached out to her colleagues, friends, and even former patients who had been through similar situations. Donations of baby clothes, diapers, and other essentials started pouring in. People offered advice, emotional support, and even financial assistance. The kindness of strangers overwhelmed Selina, and for the first time she felt a sense of relief. She wasn't alone anymore. There was hope, and it was growing stronger every day. Selina sat quietly in her hospital room, staring at the small bassinets beside her. 3 tiny faces, each so different yet so alike, lay peacefully sleeping, unaware of the weight that their young mother carried. But the real battle was within her, a war between her love for her children and the reality of her situation. The knock on the door was soft, but it startled her nonetheless. 2 women entered dressed in somber suits, faces professional and smiles tight with empathy. They introduced themselves as social workers from the state sent to discuss her options. Selina's stomach tightened as she nodded and motioned for them to sit. One of the women, a middle-aged woman with a kind but firm expression, cleared her throat. Selina, we understand this is a difficult time for you. We're here to help you think through the best options for both you and your children. The words felt like a heavy stone sinking in Selina's chest. What do you mean? She asked, though part of her already knew. The woman took a deep breath before continuing. You're very young, only 14, and we know you love your babies. But raising 3 infants is an enormous responsibility. You need to think about what's best for you and for them in the long run. It might be too much for you to handle right now. Selina looked at her babies, her eyes welling with tears. What are you saying? Her voice quivered. The other social worker, younger and perhaps more gentle, leaned forward. There are options, Selina. You could consider adoption, where your babies would go to loving families who could provide for them. Or temporary care, like a foster home, until you're older and more stable. The words struck her like cold water. Adoption, giving them away, or sending them to some strange place where they'd be raised by others. Selina could barely breathe, the thought unbearable. How could she give up the 3 little beings who had only just come into her life? They were hers. They needed her. But the truth hit her hard. She needed them too. But was love enough? The social worker continued, her voice calm and steady. "We know this is a lot to think about, but we want you to understand that continuing your education, building a future for yourself, will be difficult if you're trying to raise them on your own right now. You deserve a chance to live your life, to finish school, to build stability. You'll have a better chance of being the kind of mother you want to be if you take time to secure your future." Selina's heart raced. Go back to school? How could she? But the weight of their needs, diapers, bottles, sleepless nights, already felt suffocating. She was barely old enough to take care of herself, let alone 3 infants. The thought of returning to high school, balancing homework with late-night feedings, seemed impossible. The older social worker placed a hand on Selina's arm, her voice soft but insistent. "It's okay to need help, Selina. You don't have to make this decision today, but you do need to think about it. We'll give you some time." Selina nodded numbly, her mind spinning in 1,000 directions. After the social workers left, the room felt even smaller. The walls closed in on her as she watched her babies sleep. How could she ever let them go? But could she really be the mother they needed at 14? Her dreams of finishing school, maybe even going to college, seemed like a distant fantasy. Yet, the thought of handing them over to someone else, of not being the one to kiss them goodnight, was more than she could bear. As the days turned into weeks, Selina wrestled with her decision. The social worker's words echoed in her mind. Each day she held her babies, feeling their soft skin, smelling the sweet, powdery scent of their hair, and every time she knew there was no way she could give them up. No foster home, no matter how loving, could replace the connection she felt with her children. But she also knew she couldn't do it alone. That's when Alvin came back into her mind. Alvin, the father of her babies, the boy who had vanished the moment she told him she was pregnant. Selina had spent months resenting him, hating him for abandoning her when she needed him most. But now the stakes were different. Could Alvin be the only lifeline, help her keep their family together? He's 18 years old, and he can become guardian for her and the children. Sophia had urged her to reach out to him. "Maybe he's changed," Sophia had said, though even she sounded doubtful. But Selina was desperate. She knew she couldn't make it without help, and Alvin was the only other person who had a claim to these babies. Hesitant but determined, Selina decided to call him. With shaking hands, she picked up her phone, scrolling down to Alvin's number. Would he answer? Would he even care? She had no choice but to try. Alvin stood in the hallway of the hospital, his heart pounding in his chest. The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to the air. The distant sound of a baby crying somewhere down the corridor seemed to echo in his mind. He had avoided this moment for so long, kept his distance, convinced himself that running was the only choice. But here he was, about to face Selina and the 3 tiny lives they had created together. His palms were slick with sweat as he reached for the door handle, hesitating for just a second longer. He thought back to the many nights he had come to the hospital, standing in the shadows, watching from afar. He had seen her, cradling the babies in her arms, her face pale with exhaustion, but still full of some kind of strength he didn't understand. He had watched in silence, torn between fear and longing, unable to step forward. The guilt gnawed at him every time, but he couldn't stay away. He had to see them, even if it was from a distance, even if he couldn't gather the courage to walk through that door. He wasn't proud of it. He was ashamed. But now, Selina had called him. She had asked him to come, and Alvin knew there was no turning back. With a deep breath, Alvin pushed the door open. The soft light of the hospital room fell on Selina's tired face. She was sitting in bed, holding one of the babies, her arms wrapped protectively around the tiny bundle. The other two slept peacefully beside her, their chests rising and falling with gentle, rhythmic breaths. Alvin felt his chest tighten as he took it all in the scene that should have been his from the beginning, but wasn't because he had been too scared to claim it. Selina looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and something else, maybe relief. There was a pause, a long moment where neither of them spoke. Then she broke the silence. "You came," she said softly, her voice fragile yet steady. Alvin swallowed hard, nodding. "Yeah, I came." He stepped further into the room, his legs feeling heavier with every step. When he was finally close enough, he glanced down at the three tiny faces, their innocence radiating from every pore. Their little hands, their soft cheeks, their tiny eyes still closed to the world. Something inside Alvin broke. He could feel it. The wall he had built around his heart crumbling, piece by piece, until nothing was left but raw emotion. "I didn't know what to do," Alvin confessed, his voice shaky. "I didn't know how to handle all of this. I was scared." Selina looked at him for a long time, her eyes searching his face. She didn't say anything at first, just watching him, as if trying to decide if he was worth trusting again. Finally, she sighed, the tension in her shoulders relaxing just a little. "I knew it was you," she whispered. "The man outside. I knew you were watching. I could feel it." Alvin froze. So she had known all along. He had been so sure that no one had noticed him, that his cowardly attempts to stay connected from a distance had gone unseen. But Selina had known. She had always known. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry, Selina." For the first time since he walked into the room, Selina's expression softened. She nodded, her fingers brushing over the soft hair of the baby in her arms. "I called you because I couldn't do this alone," she admitted, "and because I needed to know if you still cared." Alvin's heart ached. He stepped closer, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed, close enough to touch one of the babies. He reached out tentatively, his hand trembling as he gently touched the soft skin of his child's cheek. The baby stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Alvin's breath hitched. "I care," Alvin whispered. "I never stopped caring. I was just too stupid to face it." The emotions swirling inside him became too much to bear. He looked at Selina, his eyes full of remorse and something else deeper. "I want to be here, Selina. For you. For them. I don't want to run anymore." Selina stared at him, her lips parting slightly in disbelief. This was the first time Alvin had said anything like this since the day he found out she was pregnant. She had waited so long to hear these words, and now that they were here, she wasn't sure how to feel. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice small, almost afraid of his answer. Alvin nodded, his voice firm this time. "I'm sure. I'm not leaving. Not again." Selina exhaled, a breath she didn't know she was holding. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a flicker of hope. The meeting with the social services was approaching, and she couldn't shake the fear gripping her heart. Would they really be able to keep their babies? Just a week ago, the caseworker had come in with files stacked high, her voice polite but firm as she explained the process ahead. Selina, barely 14, knew she didn't meet the typical standards of a mother. And Alvin? He'd only just returned, unsure of himself, though Selina could see he was trying. The social services made it clear. If they wanted to keep their children, they'd have to prove themselves capable. There were tests, interviews and evaluations ahead. "We'll get through this," Selina had whispered to Alvin as they sat on the hospital bed. He had looked at her, fear dancing in his eyes, but she knew deep down that they had no other choice. They had to fight. The day of the first evaluation came faster than either of them had anticipated. Alvin's palms were sweaty as they walked into the office of the social worker. Selina squeezed his hand, trying to reassure him despite her own nerves. The room was cold, sterile, as if designed to make them feel even smaller than they already were. "You understand the gravity of the situation, right?" the caseworker asked, her eyes scanning their young faces. "We need to make sure the environment you're providing for these children is stable and nurturing. Parenting at your age, it's a massive responsibility." Selina nodded, her throat dry. "We know," she whispered. "We're ready." Alvin, however, stayed silent. Selina could sense his hesitation, his fear of saying the wrong thing. But as the caseworker continued her questioning, something shifted in him. He straightened his back and spoke, his voice low but steady. "We'll do whatever it takes," he said. "These kids are our world." In the days that followed, Alvin seemed to grow into his new role. He started looking for part-time jobs, not just to help support the family financially, but to prove, mostly to himself, that he could be responsible. He'd spend hours at Selina's side, holding their babies, trying to learn how to soothe their cries, how to change their diapers without fumbling. There was a quiet determination in his eyes now, one Selina hadn't seen before. "I'm not going anywhere this time," he told her one evening, after a long day of paperwork and planning. Selina had believed him. He was different now, more grounded, more willing to step up, and she needed him more than ever. Thankfully, they weren't entirely alone. Sophia, Selina's nurse, had been a godsend from the very beginning. When the social services process began, Sophia stepped in, guiding them through the daunting paperwork and complicated steps. She had seen cases like theirs before, young parents trying to defy the odds, and she was determined to help them succeed. "We're going to get you through this," Sophia had said, her voice kind but firm. She had a way of making Selina feel safe, even when the world seemed like it was collapsing around her. And Alvin. He listened to her every word. Sophia connected him with local resources, helping him learn more about parenting, about what the social workers would be looking for during the home visits and interviews. Every night, after Sophia had gone home, Selina and Alvin would talking about the future. They were still too young, really, but they had grown up so much in just the last few weeks. Selina had watched Alvin's transformation with quiet pride. He wasn't the scared boy who had left her months ago. He was becoming a father, slowly but surely. But the pressure weighed heavily on both of them. There were moments, late at night, when Selina felt the crushing weight of everything. The fear of losing her children, the uncertainty of whether Alvin could truly handle the responsibility long-term. But then she'd look at her babies, their tiny chests rising and falling with each breath, and she knew she had to stay strong. "We're going to be okay," Alvin would say, his voice filled with conviction, though Selina knew he was trying to convince himself just as much as her. And yet, with each passing day, she believed it a little more. They were getting stronger, more capable. Together, they could do this. The final day of the evaluation came. The social workers would be visiting soon, inspecting every corner of their lives, making judgments about their fitness to be parents. Selina could hardly breathe as they waited in their small apartment, but when she looked at Alvin, standing there holding one of their babies, she felt a surge of hope. No matter what happened next, they were in this together. The room was finally quiet, the chaos of the past few days slowly settling like dust after a storm. They had done it, they had passed the tests, and now the babies were theirs to care for. But reality, as it often does, hits hard. The first night out of the hospital was a disaster. The babies cried one after the other, demanding constant attention. Alvin, already overwhelmed, fumbled through diaper changes and bottle feeding, his inexperience showing. Selina, though she had read every baby book she could find, found herself just as lost. Exhaustion clouded her every move, her arms aching from holding the babies, her mind racing with doubt. "Selina, I don't know if I can do this," Alvin admitted in a low voice, sitting on the floor beside her as another sleepless night dragged on. His face, shadowed with fatigue, bore the weight of a young man grappling with responsibilities far too heavy for his age. Selina looked at him, her own eyes heavy with exhaustion but filled with a quiet determination. "We don't have a choice, Alvin," she whispered, glancing down at the baby cradled in her arms. "They need us, and we've already come this far." The next few days were no easier. The financial strain quickly became apparent. Baby formula, diapers and hospital bills piled up faster than they had anticipated. Selina found herself constantly worrying about how they would manage. They had little experience, no real income, and 3 mouths to feed. Every day felt like a test they weren't prepared to take, a mountain too steep to climb. But through the fatigue and the doubt, something unexpected began to happen. Slowly, amid the sleepless nights and chaotic days, Selina and Alvin started finding a rhythm. Alvin, who had once been scared to even hold the babies, now took over some of the night feedings, learning to soothe their cries with a gentle touch. His initial clumsiness turned into confidence, his hesitation replaced by a growing sense of responsibility. Selina noticed the change in him, and with it, something softened in her heart. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but they were doing it. Together. The walls that had once stood between them, built by fear and abandonment, began to crumble. For the first time in a long while, Selina felt she could rely on Alvin. He was there, not just physically but emotionally, in a way he hadn't been before. "You're getting better at this," Selina murmured one night as she watched Alvin carefully swaddle one of the babies. He looked up at her, a small, tired smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I had a good teacher," he replied, his voice warm with sincerity. It was a moment of connection, fleeting but real, a reminder of why they had ever been together in the first place. The days continued, and as the babies grew, so did Selina's resolve. She knew that, for their family to have a chance, she needed to go back to school. Her education was the only way she could see a better future for them, a way out of the financial struggles that loomed over them like a dark cloud. But going back to school while raising 3 infants seemed impossible. "How are we supposed to manage?" she asked one afternoon, her voice laced with frustration and doubt. "I can't go back to school and leave you with the babies all day. And we can't afford daycare." Alvin sat across from her, his brows furrowed as he thought. "We'll figure it out," he said slowly, though his own uncertainty was clear. "Maybe I can pick up more hours at work, and Sophia, she's already offered to help." Selina hesitated. Sophia had been a constant support, always offering to babysit or lend a hand when they were overwhelmed. Selina knew she had no other choice. If she wanted a better life for her children, she had to make sacrifices. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice steady, though her heart raced with anxiety. "I'll go back to school. But we need a plan, Alvin." Together, they began mapping out their future. It wasn't easy, and there were still countless obstacles ahead, but for the first time since their world had been turned upside down by 3 tiny lives, Selina felt a flicker of hope. With Alvin by her side and the support of people like Sophia, maybe, just maybe, They could make it work. As the soft morning light filtered through the thin hospital curtains, Selina sat on the edge of the bed, cradling her youngest daughter, Serena, in her arms. Her hands shook slightly from exhaustion, but a small, weary smile tugged at her lips as she looked down at the baby, who was now dozing off after a long night of feeding and fussing. Alvin was on the other side of the room, holding Shana and Sam, gently rocking them back and forth in the small cradle, his eyes heavy with the same tiredness that seemed to cling to them both. It had been months long, exhausting months, since Selina and Alvin had brought their triplets into the world. And though every day felt like an uphill battle, they were finally settling into a rhythm, albeit a messy and unpredictable one. For the first time, Selina felt like they were becoming a family. "You think we're doing okay?" Selina's voice was barely above a whisper as she glanced up at Alvin, her fingers gently stroking Serena's tiny hand. Alvin let out a soft sigh, his lips curving into a hesitant smile. "It's tough, but we're getting the hang of it, right?" he replied, his voice deep and tired, but laced with hope. "It's tough, but we're getting the hang of it, right?" He glanced down at Shana, her small face peaceful as she slept, and for a moment his expression softened in a way Selina hadn't seen before. They weren't the same two teenagers who had been terrified and lost when the babies were first born. The fear was still there, lurking in the corners of their minds. But now there was something else, something stronger. Selina could feel it in the way Alvin had stayed with her, had worked alongside her, even after everything. He had come back, and in the months since, they had slowly rebuilt something fragile but real. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was theirs. "We're getting there," Selina repeated, more to herself than to Alvin, as she leaned down to kiss Serena's forehead. The baby stirred but didn't wake, and Selina sighed softly, relieved. The past few months had been a whirlwind of sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and constant feedings. There were moments when Selina thought she wouldn't make it, when the weight of it all seemed too much to bear. But somehow, through sheer determination and Alvin's unexpected support, she had survived. They had survived. Alvin placed Shana back in her crib, his movements careful, almost reverent, as if he still couldn't believe these 3 tiny lives were his responsibility. He turned to Selina, running a hand through his messy hair, and for a moment there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Gratitude, maybe. Or relief. "I know I messed up, Selina," he said quietly, crossing the room to sit beside her. He reached out, taking her free hand in his. His grip was warm, steady. "But I'm not going to mess this up again, I promise." Selina swallowed hard, her chest tightening at his words. She wanted to believe him. She really did. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to. After everything they'd been through, after all the hurt and betrayal, Alvin was still here. And that had to count for something. "I believe you," she whispered, squeezing his hand back. "But we've got a long road ahead, Alvin. It's not just about promises. It's about proving it day by day." Alvin nodded, his gaze steady, full of quiet determination. "I know, and I will. For you, for them." For a long moment, the room was quiet, save for the soft breathing of the babies. Selina looked at Alvin, at the man he was trying so hard to become for her and their daughters, and she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. They were parents. They were a family. Selina glanced down at Serena in her arms, then over at Alvin, who was now holding Samia, their 3rd daughter, and she felt a swell of hope rise in her chest. Despite the odds, despite everything they had faced, there was hope. They had a future ahead of them, one filled with challenges, sure, but also filled with love, growth, and the possibility of something better. With Alvin by her side and the support of her community, Selena knew she could handle whatever came next. "We've got this," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else, but Alvin heard her. He nodded, smiling softly, and for the first time in a long while, Selena truly believed it. They had each other, and for now, that was enough. Thank you all for watching today's emotional story. It's been a tough, yet hopeful journey for Selena and Alvin, from their early struggles as young parents to their determination to build a happy family. They've shown that no matter how hard life gets, with love and perseverance, we can overcome anything. If this story inspired you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any upcoming videos. And feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Selena and Alvin will overcome everything and have their happily ever after? Let's spread more meaningful stories together. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm your name, and I'll see you in the next video. Have an amazing day. And don't forget to hit the bell icon to get notified whenever I upload a new video.